This webinar is an opportunity for me to share my love for Intuiface. Officially, I'm responsible for marketing at Intuilab, but unofficially, I am Intuiface's #1 fan. I love this software so much. I've been working with the company since 2011. We're on version 6 right now. This is a very mature product that has absorbed years of customer feedback and R&D to become the amazing product it is today. And this is my opportunity to show off that wonder to you. At the very least, I hope to dispel a couple possible misconceptions. The first is that Intuiface is PowerPoint with touch. It's much more than that. In a way, we'd like to think of it as application creation with touch, although that makes it sound like a developer tool, and it's not. I mean, if you're a developer, you're welcome to use it, but the hurdle, the bar for designing amazing interactive content is pretty low when it comes to Intuiface. It's way more than bullet points on a slide. The other misconception may not be so much that you're confused about what you can build, you just think it's hard. It must be complicated. We put intuitive in the name of the product for a reason. I think it really is. The product is broad, though. It does do a lot. And because it does a lot, you're not going to absorb everything by osmosis in the first couple of minutes. So you do need to spend a little bit of time with it. But as you'll see in this webinar, and as you'll discover by using all of our educational resources, it's not complicated. You guys can pick this thing up, okay? Let's see if I can prove it. We'll begin just so you understand what we're going to cover. I'll give you a 20,000-foot view of the platform, give you a sense of how the main products play together. We'll spend the bulk of our time on design philosophy and concepts, which is the demo. The majority of our time together is a demo. And then we'll wrap it up with a short look at what you do with the work when you're done. How do you collaborate? How do you deploy? And things of that nature. If you look at your screen, there's a variety of different experiences, all of which, by the way, you can download for free in our marketplace. So let me get some of this up here. So I'm spinning. Let's open up a couple. So here's a museum exhibition, so I'll move that there. Here's digital signage, and that's portrait-oriented. We'll move that there. What else do we have in here? Well, this is retail, so I guess I'll pop out a little bit of retail. Do you see how they're completely different? I mean, there's no similarity at all between their visuals. Every single pixel is different in these designs. That's a very important point I want to make sure you understand. You control every single pixel of your design. You're not buying pre-built templates from us. You're not buying plugins or pre-built apps. What you're purchasing is the ability to realize any design, any storyboard, any layout using your own content, your own images, videos, documents, 3D models, websites, and on and on and on. There's enormous flexibility here, a lot of latitude. You're not stuck looking like every other customer of Intuiface. Swipe. There we go. There are 3 products, main products in the Intuiface family. The first is Composer. That's the editor. It's the tool you'll use to create your interactive content. It runs on Windows. It only runs on Windows. So if you want to use Composer on a Mac, you can, but you first have to run Windows on the Mac using something like Boot Camp or virtualization software like Parallels. You create any number of experiences you want using your own content. And when you're ready to go live, to send it out to the field, you'd use Player. Player is the runtime. It's the tool you use to run the stuff you build in Composer. Like Composer, Player runs on Windows, but it also runs on Android. It runs on iOS on the iPad. It runs on the Chrome OS, and it runs on Tizen, which is the operating system for Samsung's smart signage platform. So you build in Composer on Windows. You run in any of 5 operating systems using Player. You don't have to know anything about this operating systems. Player looks identical. It acts identical. You don't need to know the first thing. It just works. Okay? So you build in Composer, you run on Player. In the middle is a variety of capabilities that's web accessible using something we call Management Console. With Management Console, you can share experiences with colleagues and clients. You can deploy experiences to players anywhere in the world without having to get out of bed. You can capture data about what users are doing, track their interactions, and you can do things like manage the versions of Player running on distributed devices. So there's a lot of capability bundled in the cloud under this notion of Management Console. You can use Composer for free or buy a license. You can use Player for free or buy a license. There is no license for Management Console. Anybody has access to it, but some of its features are tiered based on which composer plan you have. So your composer plan determines the extent of what you can do with Management Console. Not looking for you guys to be a packaging or pricing expert so early in the introduction, but I wanted to stress one point. If you went to our pricing page, and by the way, we don't hide our prices, we don't make you talk to us and negotiate, they're right there for everybody to see. If you go to that page, you'll notice there's 4 composer plans: Free, Essential, Premier, Enterprise. Main takeaway from this: everything I show you, in fact, 100% of what Composer can do, you can do for free. You don't need to spend a dime to convince yourself that Intuiface will enable you to build whatever you want to build. Okay? You don't have to spend a dime. Of course, how the heck do we stay in business, right? Well, there are some limitations on playback. There's a watermark. If you license the product, the watermark disappears. You have to be online. If your product is licensed, you can take it offline, that sort of thing. So just enough limitations on playback that when you're convinced Intuiface is just nature's gift to creating interactive content, you invest in these licenses and you go live. That's it. So I think it's now time for our demo. Great. So we're going to start with the concept of scenes, sequences, and layers. And look, there's really nothing to show you in Player. It's just a runtime. That's all its job is to run stuff. So there's nothing really to show you. I will show you a little bit of Management Console at the end. The bulk of this demonstration is here in Composer, and here we are. So right now we're looking at one scene in Composer, in the editor. We're looking at this one particular scene. If I use the scenes drop down at the top, it shows all of the scenes in my experience. And this experience contains, I don't know, give or take 15 scenes. You could think of scenes as slides. We call them scenes in a way to differentiate them from some of the commonly understood characteristics of a slide. Most importantly, the order of the scenes here may have 0 relevance to the order in which scenes are experienced by your audience. Here's an easy example. If I have a table of contents on scene 1, the selection of an item on scene 1 could send me to scene 25 or scene 13 or scene 64. Is it important to know that that's scene 64? No, it isn't. It's very unlikely you're numbering scenes. There's no advantage to that for a person to know what scene they're on. So scenes can be experienced in any order. As a designer, okay, this order is important. You're organizing your work. Not only can you drag and drop scenes to reorder them, you can even create what we call sequences, like getting started. See, getting started? That's a sequence that just enables me to visually organize my scenes in a way that makes sense to me and that would make sense to anybody I'm collaborating with. You don't have to use them, but it's a convenience. You can rename all your scenes and your sequences and do whatever you want. But as a designer, yes, this is important. From the end user's perspective, they have no idea. They don't even know they're on a different scene necessarily. Is it just new content on the same scene? They don't know. And that's what you want. You don't want them to have a clue about what's going on behind the scenes. Pun intended. So that's scenes and sequences. Let's talk about layers. That's an important concept. If I click the scene structure button at the top in the blue ribbon, it opens up the scene structure panel, which is an inventory of all of the content in the scene I'm currently editing. Okay? There's a one-to-one correspondence. If I click this rectangle item on the left, you can see it's highlighted in the scene. If I click the text asset in the scene, it's highlighted in the scene structure panel. There's that one-to-one. Even if things aren't visible, it will still be listed in the scene structure panel. I can quickly toggle visibility of that title. You can't see it anymore, but it's still in the scene structure panel because it's still there. You just can't see it. Notice, by the way, we do gray it out to kind of visually represent it's not visible. And now it's back. So there's that correspondence. Scenes are comprised of one or more layers. The default is one layer. In this case, we call it middle. You can rename it to whatever. I could call it Jeff if I want. But the default name for the one layer is middle. You can have as many layers inside a scene as you'd like. The reason layers are important is because it lets you control the z-axis, the order of items in and out of the screen. Everybody knows the x-axis and the y-axis. Layers helps me control the z-axis. Anything in layer A will always be above or behind everything in layer B. It just depends on how I stack them on the left. If you look at me on the left, this little button, so here's the scene itself. My mouse is hovering over the scene, and this button lets me add a scene layer. And I can drag layers across each other to determine which is in front of which visually. Okay? You can have as many layers as you want. You can't have less than one, but one is sufficient. Maybe that's enough, or you can have more than one. That's why layers are important to why you might want to use them. I want to talk about something we call experience layers, because it's a really important design concept that I think you're all going to want to use pretty quickly. This thing called template is actually an experience layer. Let me explain. Layers inside a scene are particular to that scene. It's content specific to that scene. If I go to a new scene, it's a whole new set of scene layers with their own content. Experience layers are scene independent. They're global to all the scenes. It's not there are multiple instances, one per scene. It's literally the same thing everywhere. Okay? Let me give you an example. Let's go to the content library. This is an inventory of all the images and videos and documents used in my experience. I'm going to drag an image here into the scene. If you look on the left, it was dragged into the middle layer. You can see it's in the middle layer. If I go to another scene, it's gone. Because that image is in a scene layer, when I go to a new scene, it disappears. It's not in the current scene's layer, one of the layers of the current scene. Let me drag this image into what we call template. Again, I could have named that anything I want. That's an experience layer. If I now go to the next scene, it's there too. Why? Because experience layers are global. If I move, oh, hold on. It's right protected. There we go. If I move this image over to the right, and then go back to the first scene, it's moved over to the right, because again, the experience layer is global. Thus, I would use it, for example, to show things that will be common to all scenes. That's an easy way to do it. Let me give you a better example, because this is pretty cool. Let's say I'm building a museum exhibition. I want to have music that's typical of that time playing over the exhibition. If I put that music in a scene layer, then during scene-to-scene transitions, the music's going to stop and restart, because the old scene layers disappear and the new scene layers are loaded. So you get that break in the music, and that's no good. If I put the audio in an experience layer, it is independent of the scenes, thus it will play through the transition. It has nothing to do with the scenes. It's separate from the scenes. So it's a very powerful design concept, enabling you to create content that is universally held by multiple scenes. You can choose whether or not a scene contains a certain experience layer. It's not an all or none. You can tweak it, but by default, it's everywhere. I guarantee you're going to use it because it's so powerful. Okay? You can have as many experience layers as you'd like. This top node in the scene structure panel is the project itself. And here, this little button on the right is add an experience layer, and that can be either in front or behind the scene. You can have experience layers behind the scene. You can have experience layers in front of the scene. That's up to you. You can have as many as you want. I spent a lot of time on that feature because it's a very powerful one that people may not find right away, and I wanted you to be aware of it. Okay? Scenes, layers, sequences. Great. You're experts. Let's go to the next section, assets and collections. Assets and collections. That's the stuff you're going to show your audience. First button on the blue ribbon up top, that's the assets panel. Here's a list of all of the asset types available for use in my experience. I can work with images, multiple formats, JPEG, GIF, animated GIF, BMP. Video, multiple formats. YouTube, you can live stream YouTube and wherever you are in the world. Webcam, so you can live stream the webcam on Windows and Android devices, take snapshots of the live stream, annotate them. Document, multiple formats, PDF, PowerPoint, Word. Web browser, you can browse the web in Intuiface. Under the covers, it's a very recent version of the Chromium web rendering engine. That's the heart of Chrome. That's what we use, which means all of HTML5 and JavaScript and WebGL, pretty much every website on the planet, you can load in to Intuiface and interact with it directly using your fingers. Flash, it's a bit of a dying technology, but there's tons of skills and pre-existing content, and on Windows, you can run Flash animation in Intuiface. 3D models, recently revamped, lots of 3D model formats supported, very good performance for large-scale models. You can rotate, resize, and zoom. Audio, I mentioned that briefly, right? Could be background music, could be sound effects, lots of different formats are supported. Microsoft Deep Zoom. So that's a niche technology developed by Microsoft for people like archivists who want to protect delicate artifacts. They take super high definition images of those artifacts, make it available as Microsoft Deep Zoom, give those digital versions to researchers protecting the original. And then the HTML asset that lets people enter their own HTML code and their own style sheets, their own CSS content. So it wouldn't normally be a full website. It would be a web plugin, for example, or just some code that does something special, creating charts or whatever. You can embed those in Intuiface. Pretty powerful. So all of these different media types can be incorporated in your visuals. If I just click one of these things, you'll see it adds, in this case, an image container to my experience. Notice it's blank. This is actually important because what this means is we differentiate the container from the content. And that's important because it means we can assign content at runtime. It's one of the beauties of Intuiface is you don't have to know what you're going to show at design time. You can wait until runtime to show it. You can do some really amazing things with Intuiface because of that fact. Let's use some specific examples. So let me grab a movie poster. Here's Beetlejuice, right? Intuiface composers are what you see is what you get editor. So I can rotate, resize, and zoom this image, for example. Move it around. And then if I click play at the top in the blue ribbon, player is embedded inside Composer so you can test your work. I am now interacting with that image using my fingers. In this case, it's 2 fingers. Here I'm using 5 fingers. We're able to rapidly identify where each finger is, what it's doing, and responding to those movements. We have a gesture recognition engine that's patented because it does such a good job of that. So it's automatically interactive. I don't have to tell it to be interactive. I don't have to write any code. Now you might be wondering, what if I don't want it to be interactive? I want it to be static. It's just window dressing. Well, that's when we'll get to the topic of properties. But if you look on the right there, if I open the properties panel for this image, multiple categories, I can go to the container behavior category. Take a look here on the right, allow movement, allow rotation, allow resizing, constrict the movement direction. Lots of ways to constrain and configure content inside your experience. And that includes whether or not you want it to be manipulated. You can prevent that or allow it or whatever you want. So that's an image. Let's add a few more items, shall we? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me drag in those images. Now you know how to make an image wall, by the way. That's pretty simple, huh? We'll get this out of the way a little bit. Okay, that's good enough, right? Let me also add a video. I know we have here he is. Here's a WMV file. We support multiple formats, but that's WMV. Here's a PDF, so I'm adding the PDF. All right, I've got a video, I've got a book, and I've got an image wall of 5 images. Play. I know the video is a little preamble. I'm going to start that video. Here's the book, and I can manipulate the book with my fingers, but it's a scroll. I can scroll my way through these pages. See that? The video is playing. Here's some awesome eye candy. While the video plays, I manipulate it. And I got all these images, and I'm manipulating these images and turning the pages and moving the video, moving the images, turning the all at the same time, and you get the idea. You can work with as many touch points as the hardware allows. If it's a 10-point touchscreen, Intuiface works with 10. If it's a 64-point touchscreen, Intuiface works with 64. If it's a multi-screen display wall, and yes, we can work with multi-screen display walls. Let's say it's a 1x3, 1 screen high, 3 screens wide. Each screen supports 10. 10 times 3 screens is 30 touch points. We can work with them all. Thus, more than one person can be doing different things at the same time. Now, of course, if you're using an iPad, how many hands realistically different people are going to be touching, a 12-inch screen or a 15-inch screen? So the number of touch points and concurrency isn't as important as it might be on a multi-screen wall where there's a good chance more than one person is doing something different. But whatever, it doesn't matter. If the hardware allows it, we can do it, which is pretty nice, right? Get rid of the video. Let's get rid of the document. Let's talk about collections, because this scene is about assets and collections. I'll highlight these 5 images, right-click. I'm selecting Add into Group from the pop-up menu. And now we have a group. Collections in Intuiface are a single context, a single interactive context for multiple items. Okay. The group collection is similar to the notion of a group in PowerPoint. I might use a group collection to create a data sheet where I have an image up top, I'm sorry, a title up top and then an image, then maybe a paragraph of a description, and then 3 videos, and then price, and then whatever, right? I can organize any kind of content I want, display them however I wish, but while it's interacted with, it moves together and it resizes together. You'll be using group collections, but to be fair, probably not in hour 1. So there are other collection types that have more value short term when you're first getting to know Intuiface. Let's take a look at some of those. While I've been interacting with everything, you may have noticed a couple of rabbit ears in the upper right-hand corner. Everything in Intuiface has the upper rabbit ear. Collections also have the bottom one. The upper ear is sort of a quick properties panel. So there's the full-fledged one on the right, so that's everything. But the rabbit ear lets me get my hands on some of the kind of really typically important ones. The bottom is specific to collections. It lets me manipulate them. So for example, I can ungroup it. I can pop it out of the group and just make them an image wall again. I can also change it. There are multiple collection types in Intuiface. Let's look at a couple of the others. Asset grid, that's a popular one. So there's an asset grid. I need to increase the item size so you can see it. So hold on a second. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, there it is. So here we are with rows and columns, 1 row, multiple columns. I can configure that. If you look in the properties panel on the right, I can change this from a horizontal asset grid to a vertical asset grid. I can change the number of rows and which direction it fits. Lots of things I can do. But basically, it does this. Using my finger, I'm scrolling through this gallery of images. See that? And that's a typical way to use a collection as a gallery. I can put any combination of assets in the same collection. I can have images, videos, and documents in the same collection. I can have collections in collections. I can put groups inside the asset grid. Back to the properties panel. Let's do this style drop down, change it to an asset flow. Here's an asset flow. Using the properties, we'll expand the wingspan, decrease the expansion factor, spread out the aperture a little bit, play. This is an asset flow, which has a notion of focus, right? The asset grid was flat. Even the group is kind of flat, although you can stack things. Here in the asset flow, there's always an item in front. There's an item of focus. So I could put an asset grid inside an asset flow and put groups in the asset. I could do that. It sounds very confusing, but you could. Another collection style is the carousel. Everybody loves the carousel. I'll use in the properties, I'll decrease the viewing angle, decrease the diameter a little bit, and play. And now I'm spinning my carousel. See that? Isn't that nice? I could probably have an unlimited number of items in an asset grid. I mean, you could get away with it because it's flat, right? So, if you have 1,000 items, I'm not sure that makes sense, but you could. Would you have 1,000 items in a carousel? No, because everything is going to be visible, right? So you're going to want to be careful about how many you put in there. But that's an aesthetic decision for you. We don't limit it. So those are some basic collection types. Let's look at a couple others. See me on the right here, circular panel. So think of it as a 1-row asset grid curved into a circle. Flip chart, that's 1 item at a time. That's a pretty simple classic collection type, 1 item at a time. Group, you've seen that. Helix is like a strand of DNA scrolling upwards and downwards. The map collection is too cool to just talk about. I'm going to show you, so hold on. Pinboard, that's a scene within a scene. Remember, when I resize the group, I resize the items inside the group. If I resize a pinboard, I resize the window 2 items inside the pinboard. The items inside are unaffected. You're nesting scenes. You can do some really funky stuff with pinboards. The scroll collection, that's pretty powerful. One use would be to have a panoramic image with labels, right? The image is much wider than the screen. I want to label different items on that image. So I put the image in the scroll collection. I put labels on top of the image in the scroll collection. And now I can swipe that whole thing left and right and all the labels stay in place. So that'd be one use of a scroll. Another use is to reproduce the parallax effect, where the background moves more slowly than the foreground to give a sense of depth. I could produce that using multiple scroll collections that are kind of linked to each other. So a lot of cool stuff out of the scroll collection. Slideshow. That's a visual. You're not really meant to interact with it. It's the Ken Burns effect. You know, that famous documentarian. There's a slow pan and zoom on an image, then you transition to a new image. Slow pan and zoom on that image, then transition to new image. It's meant to capture your attention, create an ambiance. And then a timeline collection, which is like the map. And like the map, let me show you rather than talk about it. So I'll get rid of this collection. We'll go up to the blue ribbon. We'll open up the collections panel. And let's find the map. There's the map. Click. And now we have the map in our experience. This is what you're going to see when you first add a map. We support 2 map providers, Mapbox and Microsoft Bing. Both of them require an API key and access token that call it different things. If you don't have one, you're going to get this message. So don't be surprised when you get this message. We document online how to do it. They do have free plans, but they have some limits. But you read up about it, you get the token that makes sense for you. The map will still work, but without the token, you're going to have that message on top of it. So I'm going to show you the map with that message so you're not surprised. The default is Mapbox. If I double click, I'm zooming in, man. This is a real map. We're not faking this. This is because I have a network connection. Mapbox is feeding me these map tiles. I'm zooming in where I am, which is the state of Massachusetts, north of Boston and what's called the North Shore, in a little town called Rockport. That's where I am right now. Now that's cool, right? If in play mode, you can have maps on screen and let people drag and drop them and zoom in and zoom out. If you look at the properties panel on the right for the map, you can see that with Mapbox, I can change this to a satellite view or satellite with labels. Mapbox lets me create my own maps. That's pretty nice. So you put in the map ID, a style URL, and I get my own custom map. That's pretty amazing. If I change the map provider to Bing Maps, you can't make your own maps, but you can't change the language and pick different languages for the names of cities and countries and states. So a lot of flexibility there, and that's nice. But remember, it's a collection. It's not an asset. It's a collection, which means I should be able to put stuff in it. And if you were thinking that, you would be right. So I'm dragging in this classic point of interest icon, and let's move it over Rockport right there. Now look what happens if I move the map. The image moves with the map. It's geolocated. And I know that because when selecting this image, if you look in the properties panel on the right, there's latitude and longitude. I can move it. I can move it wherever I want. But wherever I drop it, boom, it's geolocated on that point. Now this is becoming really beautiful because what this means is I can put images and videos and documents and 3D models and web browsers and asset grid collections and group collections inside a map. And they're all geolocated. And look how easy that is. If I wasn't talking, this would have taken me 5 seconds instead of 20 seconds, right? Super fast, very powerful. Here's a cool use of a map, is a table of contents. You might identify places of business or installations or historical events or whatever. And when you select one of those items, that selection will cause a video to play or navigate you to a new scene or who knows what. And I'll show you how to do that cause and effect later, but you can. And that's amazing. I mean, it's super powerful and super easy. The timeline collection is like the map, except instead of latitude and longitude, it's dates. Every time you add something to a timeline collection, it's assigned a day, a month, and a year. Then with my fingers, I can swipe my way through the decades and the centuries and zoom in on a particular year, a particular month, and swipe my way through time. Isn't that nice? So that's assets and collections. You are now experts. Let's go a little deeper on properties. There's a few examples I want to give you here. Let's start with this one. Let me drag in this image. This image is 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall. I've shrunk it so you can see it, but the actual image is 1920 by 1080, which to some of you is a familiar dimension. That's the size of a full HD display, like my PC. So when I'm building an experience for my PC, I told Intuiface it's a 1920 by 1080 screen, so that's how big the canvas is. I can then assign my own background image simply by right-clicking and saying Set as Scene Background. So now it's my background for this scene. Every single pixel of this scene is mine. There's no pre-built backgrounds that you have to choose from. You can do anything you want, okay? Take a look at the right. Well, let me first look at the scene structure panel. I've selected the scene itself. It's the scene's properties that we're looking at on the right, okay? Now look at those properties. One of the properties of the scene itself is background, and it's set to an image. Which image? This one. I can change it, okay? But we'll do this one. We're using the background image. And I can configure it in a variety of ways. I could set the background to a color. See me on the right? I could set it to a color. I could make the background a video that loops. I can even make it transparent so I can see through Intuiface to any other third-party application and even interact with it. How awesome is that? So I have lots of easy, simple control over the background. Remember, this is a scene background, which means if I go to any other scene, it doesn't have it. It's specific to that scene. Now, this is not a good idea. I don't want that background because my text is in black, and so I'm not going to use that background. But if I have a background that I want to use everywhere, I could select the project itself. So back on the left, I'm selecting the project itself. One of the properties, look right, one of the properties of the project in its entirety is background. So I could specify a background for the entire experience. Now, if I did that, I want to make the scene background transparent so I can see the project background, right? Because you can think of it sort of as a layered. The scene background is over the experience layer, and the experience layer is over the project background, so you need to make those see-through in order to get there. But it's doable. So this is one example of where you might be working with properties. Let me give you another example. Let's take a look at some of the assets we work with. We're back to the content library. This is that inventory of content in my experience of all the images and videos and documents. Unlike the scene structure panel, which is scene specific, the content library is global. So if a particular image is used in 10 places, it's only listed here once. Hopefully that makes sense. So let me grab movie poster, movie. Okay, so I'm dragging in these 5 images. Right click, add into group, move it over here. Let's change this into an asset grid. Great. Reduce the size of the bounding box. Properties panel. You've seen me do this already. You could probably do this already. 450, 450, make those items bigger. Okay, there's my asset grid. Using the properties panel, I'm going to see those buttons at the bottom of the asset grid, those controls. I'll use the properties panel. Nah, I don't want to see those controls. I'll also add a document from the content library. So let me filter based on documents. Here's my PDF. Drag that in. Shut off the filters. So there's my PDF. Now remember, in play mode, this document was a scroll, which is fine. But there's a book style, which is pretty nice. So let's use the book style instead. You get that funky page turning effect. Put that there. Asset grid. For this guy, let me turn on a couple of things. For the asset grid, behavior. See me on the right? Tap item to open, click. Drag and drop item to open, click. Play. So here I am manipulating the book as before, but are you sitting down? Page turning effect. See that? Notice, by the way, it's behind the title, right? The way this scene is structured, the title's in front of everything. Didn't have to be that way, but that's the way it is. So here I am turning the pages. Everybody loves that effect, but I can still manipulate it. Here's my asset grid collection. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Tap item to open. Drag and drop item to open. So I can pop out copies of items inside the collection. They're not stuck in there. If it's a video, you pop out a video. If it's a web browser, you pop out a web browser. Isn't that nice? And that's just clicking a couple buttons, a couple checkboxes. Another use of properties. Let's go back to the scene structure panel. Look at me on the left. Here are the children of the asset grid collection. Right click, show properties. So show me the properties that are held in common by those images. Let's turn on the drawing tools. I'm on the right now, turning on the drawing tools. Let's change this gray line to red. And that's it. Let's clean up after ourselves. So all I did was turn on the drawing tools. I can still manipulate the book. I can still turn the pages of the book. I can still scroll the asset grid. 1, 2, 3, tap item to open. I can pop out a copy of an image, but see the drawing tool on the left? Here's Gina Davis. Here's Michael Keaton. Here's Alec Baldwin. I can choose from different erasers to erase some of this thing. And by the way, it's stuck to the image. right? I can save this image to the local file system, send it as an emailed attachment directly from Intuiface, so I can retain this annotation even after the experience is done running. So you can keep these things after the fact. You can put a drawing tool in the scene as a whole and just draw on everything. You can also assign it to specific images. How did I do that? With one click of a checkbox. There's worlds of properties that you can play with, and obviously this is not the place to talk about all of them, but please tinker. You can't break the product, so try it out and see what happens. Let's see, assets and triggers and actions. Oh, I put my asset grid in the experience layer. Do you see that? So it's still visible. What I'd like to do on scene 3 is I'm going to move the asset grid to the scene itself and the biography to the scene itself. So now it's in the property scene exclusively. And now triggers and actions is blank. Triggers and actions. Triggers when something happens, actions then do that. When then. There's over 200 triggers in Intuiface, over 200 actions in Intuiface. It's one of the more powerful and differentiating features of Intuiface versus alternatives, the power to react to users and their environment. To illustrate this principle, let me go back up to the Assets panel, click the Assets button in the upper left, scroll a little bit, see these interactive assets. We have a variety of interactive assets, but I'm just going to add the button. Good old button. Because buttons exist to make something happen. Their reason for being is to make something happen. Let's open the Properties panel, Quick Properties. So let's make this red so you can see it on that background there. Close. More properties. Let's change the text as well. So now I'm on the right. Press me, and we'll make the font white. Yes, and make the font a little bigger. There we go. Okay, now we have a simple button. You can do simple things to design it. If you follow me in the upper right, I can change this from a simple button to what we call an image button. Image buttons can be assigned a released image and a pressed image. What does it look like when it's not being touched? What does it look like when it is being touched? To give that visual feedback, there are over 200 triggers in Intuiface. An actual image could act like a button. This is a button. So visually, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Okay, so that's a design choice for you. Let's stick with the simple button. Looks like a button, acts like a button. And this button does nothing, right? It's a button without a purpose, and that's kind of sad. So let's give this button a purpose. Right click, see me at the bottom, add a trigger. We're adding a trigger. When the press me button is pressed and released, then do something. When? Then. When is the trigger? The button has multiple trigger categories. Each trigger category has multiple triggers. We default to is released. When the button is pressed and released, then now we need to pick an action. Here we'll pick scene to scene navigation. Go to the scene named properties. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you do navigation in Intuiface. You call a scene-to-scene navigation action using any trigger. 1, 2, 3, press me. And now we're back. Everything in Intuiface is associated triggers and actions. Everything in Intuiface. I'm going to drag my finger from the upper right-hand corner over to the left. 1, 2, 3, swipe. Swipe. I was swiping the title. Sorry about that. So now we swiped, and now we're back to this next scene. Why did that work? So let me explain how that worked, okay? If we go back to the scene structure panel, here's the scene. You see it highlighted. Note the lightning bolt there. If I hover my mouse, it tells me there are trigger and action pairs associated with the scene. Let's take a look at one of them. When a swipe left gesture is detected, then go to the next scene. In fact, there are multiple gestures recognized by Intuiface. Isn't that cool? So you can literally draw on the screen and treat that as a trigger that can cause any action to occur. So that's why that swipe worked. Let me give you another example of how you might use triggers and actions, and I'll use the example of an experience in a public location. Right? If you have an experience running a public location, you don't want it to get stuck on some random scene. You want it to reset itself if it hasn't been used for a while. Here's how you do that. You'd be using triggers and actions. So I'm on the scene itself. I'm clicking the scene, right click. Let's add a trigger. Here, let's put a timer, an inactivity timer of 3 seconds. In other words, when nothing has happened in the scene for 3 seconds, then scene to scene navigation, go to the scene named, in this case, properties. You navigate wherever you want. Where you'd want to navigate is the scene that attracts people, right? That's what you want to have happen. Let's try it out. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. There we go. Okay. Of course, 3 seconds is ridiculous, right? If I have a 5-minute video, I need an inactivity timer of at least 5 minutes and 1 second. So you got to pick a time that makes sense, but you get the idea. Could be different for every scene, could be universal. Put in an experience layer, and it's everywhere. So that's your call. Right? Everything in Intuiface has triggers. Everything in Intuiface has actions. When the video is played, when the book reaches page 6, when this particular link is clicked, when the 3D model is rotated, all those things can be triggers. Play the video, go to page 7, open this URL, rotate the model. Those are actions. So anything you can think of pretty much as a trigger or an action. It's pretty extensive. And thanks to a later topic called interface assets, even things outside Intuiface can be the trigger, or you can cause actions to happen outside of Intuiface. You're not even constrained to your own experience. There's one other action I wanted to touch on, which is animation. We'll touch on that by going to the next topic, which is design accelerators. Back up in the blue ribbon, clicking the third button, design accelerators. This is a set of pre-built content we've created for you to simplify your ability to create visually engaging and interactive visuals. The default is to pre-install of, 6 bundles, but if you click Get More Accelerators, it opens up a listing of all the free bundles that exist. They're all free. Button styles, background images and videos, other design approaches, lots of things here you can play with. It could be a simple image. It could be a whole scene filled with stuff. It's any level of granularity. And by the way, you can create your own. So if you have an image you're going to reuse a lot, if there's a scene whose visuals you really appreciate and like a lot, you can create your own design accelerator, which will make it available in this list across all of your projects. You can add them to any new project. Let me pick one. Let me go to touch gesture icons. We have a white background. Let me look at black gesture. Here's animated double tap black. Okay, animated double tap black. So this image is telling me to double tap here. That's helpful. Image is worth 1,000 words. It's not animated though, is it? Just kind of sitting there. Let's go to play mode, try it out. Okay, you see that as breathing. It's getting bigger and smaller, so it's attracting my attention. My eyes turn to it. That's good. How do we build it? Take a look at the scene structure panel. Select the image. Okay, it's just an image. That's all it is an image. It does have a lightning bolt, though. You see that on the left? So let's hover over the lightning bolt. Let's check out the trigger action pair. Let's see. The image itself has a timer of 0.1 seconds. See, when the timer's elapsed, 0.1 seconds. Now, I know timers work. It says it right here. See it? Timers only work when their associated asset is or becomes visible. So what this is saying is the instant this image becomes visible, then what? It says resize by a factor. Oh, it's resizing itself. It's referring to itself. It's resizing itself by a factor of 1.5. So the instant the image becomes visible, it resizes itself by a factor of 150%, which is great, but it still doesn't explain animation. According to this, it gets bigger and then it stops, right? See, show timing and animation. Click. There it is. This is an animated resize. It takes 3 seconds. It has this performance profile. Starts slow, speeds up in the middle, slows down at the end. It repeats indefinitely. Because it repeats, there is no end, so this checkbox is meaningless. When it reverses, it animates the reversal. It could jump to the start, but it's animating its reversal, and it has no delay before it repeats. So you see what's happening? It takes 3 seconds to go to 150%, then 3 seconds to go to 100, then 3 seconds to go 150, and 3 seconds to go to 100. It repeats indefinitely. Any property representing a range of values can be animated through that range of values, right? Rotation angle, width and height, whatever. And you can have more than one action for the same trigger. I mean, notice for this trigger, there's an option here that says add another action. So I can keep adding more and more actions for the same trigger. Each one of them can be animated independently. I can use this timeline on the upper right of the triggers and actions panel to figure out the appropriate timing and orchestrate things so they occur in the right order and the right sequence. So this timeline helps me visualize the correspondence of animation to one another and then make sure they work right. There's a lot of power packed in to Intuiface when you know where to look for it. So that's design accelerators, and thank you, design accelerators. That's animation. Let's now talk about the last main topic, which are interface assets and binding. Interface assets enable your Intuiface experience to communicate with any external data source, business logic, or device. I'll say that again. Interface assets enable your Intuiface experience to communicate with any external data source, business logic, or device. For the technically minded, if it has an API, we can talk to it. We work with REST-based web services, .NET, and JavaScript. It enables you to do amazing stuff. This is a real standout feature of Intuiface, very unique, very powerful. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's a simple example. Let's say I'm a university and I want to create a kiosk that lets people search for alumni. How would you search for alumni with Intuiface? Well, you don't. We don't have search algorithms. But you know what we can do? We can talk to your database and call your database a search function. And we show whatever results it gives us. We can communicate with it through the API exposed by that database. Maybe it's a web service, maybe it's something else, it doesn't matter. We can communicate with that to tell it what we wanted to get information back and display it. You can do that with Intuiface. Here's a more advanced example. People are building endless aisle kiosks, retail point-of-sale kiosks with Intuiface. Now imagine, that kiosk can't show the price at the time you designed it. It's got to be the price at that instant. So how are you going to write an interactive experience in Intuiface unless you can communicate with the back office and get the price at that instant? And you can, because any half-decent ERP application is wrapped in a ton of web services. We know how to communicate with web services, so your Intuiface experience can ask your ERP application, what's the price of this item right now? Is it still in stock? What colors are available? We're just sucking it off the back office. We can also write to it. So it goes both ways. We can tell it that an item has been ordered or whatever. All of that is possible with interface assets. It's a world of possibility that just explodes what you can do. Out of the box, you'll find some interface assets we built for you. So up in the blue ribbon, I'm clicking the Interface Assets button. This panel lists the interface assets already used in my experience, and there aren't any here, so there's none listed. But if I click Add an Interface Asset, this lets me see all of the interface assets currently available out of the box. This interface asset is for Excel. Excel is a poor man's database. Everybody kind of gets it, not hard to use, but can make life a lot easier for you when working with Intuiface. Here's an example. Let's say I have a zoo with 50 animals, and I want to have a kiosk enabling people to pick an animal and get information about that animal. Well, you already know how to build that one way. You make a table of contents on scene 1, then you make 50 animal scenes, right? 1 per animal. You can do that. It's the brute force method. You could do it. Here's the problem. If you want to change the layout of the animal information scene, you have to change 50 scenes. That's lousy. If you want to change animal information, you need to replace the running experience with a new one. That's a shame, right? Here's a better way. Use Excel. You can use any data source. Everybody knows Excel. In Excel, 1 row per animal, and create a 2-scene experience, just 2. The first scene is a table of contents. It's reading the animal names from the spreadsheet. Scene 2 is a template that is dynamically filled by all the rows associated with the selected animal. Want to change animal information? Just change the spreadsheet. You don't even have to touch player or the running experience. Want to change the layout for the animal information? Now you're just changing 1 scene because it's a template instead of 50. Much easier, much easier to maintain. It even runs better. I mean, you'd be nuts not to do it. Again, we can work with any external data source, any content management system that has an API. So you can imagine anything you want. Everybody gets Excel. You can do Excel. With REST-based web services, if that's your data source, it gets even better because we speak the language. We have something called API Explorer that automatically creates the integration between your experience and that REST-based web service you specify. You don't have to know what it is. You don't have to know how it works. All you do is tell Intuiface the request URL, and API Explorer does all the rest. And you pick the things you want to show and the things you want to write to, and it works beautifully. This is a patent-pending piece of magic. We have a whole webinar about working with Excel and API Explorer, and I encourage you to see it to see how powerful this thing is. But it is. You don't need to know what web services are to work with those tens of thousands of web services available in the cloud for everything from date, time, currency conversion, movie times, and restaurant reservations. All of those things are there for the taking, and you can do that with API Explorer and Intuiface. Data tracking. This is about collecting information about the events you care about. That's the beauty of interactive content. You know what people are interested in because they touched it. And we have a real enterprise class capability enabling you to specify the events you care about and collect information about those events. There's a whole other webinar about that, right? It's probably important to know what people are doing, what they're not doing, how often is it being used, how often is it not being used. You kind of need to know that stuff, and data tracking makes it possible. Whole other webinar about it. Other things enabled through interface assets, we can work with beacons. Yep, we're not just touch. We can work with beacons out of the box. We can get tablet information, device information out of the box, like use its IP address to determine its geographic location. We can do conversion between addresses and coordinates. We can work with devices, connected objects on the Internet of Things. The Philips Hue light bulb has an IP address. It has an API through REST web services. Intuiface can talk to it, make it turn on, turn off, change colors, make it flash. We built this for you out of the box. You could have used API Explorer yourself. We didn't cheat, but we built this out of the box. You can try it. QR code generation out of the box. Fidgets. These are third-party devices that can do things like note motion. It's a motion detector, among other things. So you use the fidget motion detector as the trigger source. And thanks to the interface assets, you can use that trigger to cause things to happen in Intuiface, like, oh, every time motion is detected, play a video. Thanks to interface assets, you can send emails, save things to the local file system or USB key. You can do a Flickr search or show a Twitter feed, and we'll do that. So let me add that to our experience. On Windows, speech recognition and text-to-speech. Intuiface can talk to you, and you can talk to Intuiface. Go to scene 3. Expand that image, enter this name. It's amazing what you can do. Now, we accomplished this because Windows has a text-to-speech API and a speech recognition API. So we didn't build the features. We're using Intuiface interface assets to communicate with those features. We can get the time, and we can get countdowns, even a scheduler. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 o'clock, do X, Y, and Z. The schedule is the trigger. And things that you may not even use in week 1 or week 2, but one day you think, you know what would be nice? If I can randomly generate a number. If I can have a global variable to store information for use across multiple scenes. And here's local weather, so let me add that too. So we have local weather and Twitter. Let me drag in Twitter to create the default data template and drag in weather, so create the default data template. So these are default visuals, and for some reason our feed is not working well, so let me get a feed that works well. There you go. Okay. These are default visuals. When you show a Twitter feed or you show the weather, it doesn't have to look like this at all. You can completely explode these visuals. These are the default visuals that we've pre-created so you have something to work with. We're not faking this. So for example, this weather information is coming from Open Weather Online, which is a third party exposing weather through a REST-based web service, and we're communicating with it. All interface assets have what we call the X-ray. So on the left, local weather, see the little button, show X-ray panel? So here we are looking at the local weather interface asset is some read-only properties and some editable properties. If there are triggers or actions for that interface asset, I can see that as well. What I'll do for location, instead of London, where it's 48 degrees and clear, let's do Boston, which is 33 and partly cloudy. So it's a little bit colder in Boston. Notice that's in real time. That's happening now. We literally said to Open Weather Online, can you please give me the weather for Boston? And here it is, all loaded up in the visual. Here we are in Twitter. You can do the same thing for Twitter. You can specify a search key of some kind. This is IBM. Let's go into play mode. It's interactive. I'm scrolling through the Twitter feed from IBM. I'm scrolling through the forecast here in the weather visual. I can use an on-screen keyboard. So for Boston, I can change this to Paris. And now apparently in Paris is colder than London, but warmer than Boston. Here on the left, we have the Twitter feed for IBM. Remember tap item to open? Yes, tap item to open still works. This is coming dynamically over the wire, but still we can treat it as if it was static and make it pop out of that feed. Isn't that cool? Not hard, and this is out of the box capability. So that's the brilliance of interface assets. Now anybody can build their own. Any web service, if you want to use .NET or JavaScript because you want to communicate with an SDK of some kind, a software development kit, you can. Paid feature alert, you do need a Composer Premier or Composer Enterprise level account. You can try it with Composer Free, you can try it with Composer Essential, but to go to scale, do real work, you'd need Premier Enterprise. Okay. This scene is called Interface Assets and Binding. Interface Assets and Binding. Binding is the glue used by, not exclusively, but certainly used by interface assets. Let's open up the scene structure panel. And let's find, here's current weather, current temperature. Okay, this text asset on the left contains the number 33. That's the temperature. Let's look at the properties panel for that text asset. See me on the right? Notice how the box containing 33 is colored in. That means this property is bound to a source. The 33 is coming from someplace else. Where is it coming from? If I click it, it tells me it's coming from the local weather interface asset from a property called temperature Fahrenheit. So Open Weather Online has a property called temperature Fahrenheit. It's exposed to the interface asset, and we've bound the text asset to this property. So whatever this property is from Open Weather Online, that's what you see in the text asset, which is why it changes on the fly. Remember when I changed London to Boston, it changed right away because it's bound to the source property, which changed on the fly. So binding is that glue. I even have what are called binding converters. See me on the right? This little seashell looking thing. There's a set of converters that lets me manipulate the source value before assigning it to the target. A lot of flexibility there. I won't go into it. I don't want to distract you, but you can see how you can always go deeper in this product and get more and more flexibility and react more dynamically to the environment. Binding can be used, it's not exclusive to interface assets. I could have two images and two scenes bound to each other. So when you rotate one, it rotates the other. A lot of those things might be accomplished better with an experience layer, so you don't need separate images, just use the same one. But you can bind any property to any property in Intuiface itself. You don't need interface assets. All right. That's everything, guys. That's all the building blocks of Intuiface. There's a ton of triggers and actions you didn't look at, and lots of interface assets you didn't look at, and interface assets you can build. Believe me, you can go a lot deeper, but that's the basics. That's everything. So what I'd like to do, no questions, okay. What I'd like to do is wrap up with a brief discussion about what to do with your experience when you're done, right? If you're ready to share it with colleagues and clients or maybe deploy it. What you would do in Composer, under the File menu, you can see it here, Publish to Share or Deploy. Publishing means putting a copy of your experience in the cloud. The default is to use Intuiface Cloud Storage. That storage is free. The higher your Composer tier, the more free space you get, but everybody gets some free space. A copy is pushed into the cloud. And by pushing it into the cloud, it enables us to facilitate sharing and deployment. We can help you do that more effectively because you put a copy in the cloud. You could use your own Amazon S3 bucket. You could use your own FTP, FTPS site. Maybe you want to do that. Under the covers, Intuiface Cloud Storage is also Amazon S3, so it's very scalable, very reliable, but it's up to you if you're comfortable using the storage we give you or you want to use your own. Whatever you pick, when you publish, a copy is put there, and once you've put the copy up there, you can share and deploy. Let's talk about experience sharing first. I'm going to go right up to the Share and Deploy console in Intuiface. If you ever log into your Intuiface account on the web, you get to Management Console. We talked about this at the beginning and all the capabilities available in Management Console. Upper left-hand corner, here's the Share and Deploy console. Let's look at our experience inventory. So here's all my experiences. And let's get rid of ones that are shared. Okay, so here are two experiences that have been published by my account but haven't been shared yet. Let me click one of them. So some basic information about that experience and then a few tabs. The first tab, Share with URL. Each experience has a unique URL. If I enter that URL in a browser on Windows, iOS on the iPad, Android, or Chrome, we will automate, by as much as the platform permits, installation of player, download and running of the experience. Everything is hands-free as much as the OS allows us. This enables you to share experiences with people that don't have player, maybe don't even know what it is, not comfortable installing things. That's when you'd use this. It's a play-only approach. You wouldn't be using Composer with this approach. It's just sharing the experience as it runs. Okay? You can even share your licenses. See that checkbox, permit use of my license? We'll stop the sharing. Another way to share is with accounts. And the reason you would do this is, for example, if you're collaborating and editing and you want to share the actual experience with somebody so they can make edits. Here you'd put email addresses and then click the share button. Reader means you're sharing a read-only version. Whoever receives it can download it into Composer or Player, but if it's Composer and they want to make changes, they have to do a save as. If you have Composer Premier or Composer Enterprise, you can share with write privileges, which means you're sharing the master. It's not a read-only version. They're modifying the version you shared with them. So you're not creating multiple copies. You're all working on the same copy. One person at a time. We don't do version control, so it's one person at a time, one person with the pen at a time, but you can share the master. Okay. So because it's published, you can share it. The other thing you can do is deploy. And deploy means put it on players anywhere in the world. In order to use the remote deployment feature, you need Composer Enterprise. Got to have Composer Enterprise to remotely deploy. So I might have one device, I might have 1,000 devices in 90 different countries. I can stay home in my pajamas. I don't even have to get out of bed. I can remotely deploy experiences to those players anywhere in the world because of the remote deployment feature. This Intuiface account has only one player currently. It looks like it's running something if I open it up. This is a live screenshot. It's refreshed every 30 seconds, I think, so it's running something right now. In fact, it's running an experience called Move GIF Comparison, so it might be something that the QA team is doing. I can tag my players, so I can give them any labels as I want, and I can filter my players and say, only show me the players with the Boston tag, so that's only the players in Boston. And so for either one player or a group of players, I can collectively select them. And then here in the bottom, deploy, pick the experience I want, and then click the deploy button. And now I've done remote deployment. Isn't that simple? It's easy. You can also do that from the experience point of view. Each experience has a deploy tab as well. In that case, you're selecting the players, and then you deploy. So you can go either direction. Okay. So that's sharing and deploying. Again, remember, with deployment, you do need Composer Enterprise. Okay, other topics. So we touched on these things. You might want to go deeper. Data tracking, again, there's a whole webinar about that for collecting information about the events you care about. It's a real enterprise class capability. Whether you have one player or a million, they're all individually collecting data, uploading it to a single location that we maintain for you. We collate it together, make it available for analysis. You don't do analysis with us. You'd use a third-party tool for that, but we put all the data in one place for you. Player. I didn't show it to you because, again, there's nothing to really see, but they're all available for free. Player's embedded in Composer for Windows. That's Player for Windows. But the other platforms, you can install it, use it for free. It'll have the watermark. It'll have to be online, but you don't have to pay. You can import content, not just obvious things like images and PDFs and that sort of thing, but you can even do PowerPoint, you can do Excel, you can do Photoshop. You can drag and drop PSD files, and we automatically import tag layers as PNGs. So that's pretty cool. There's a remote control. We call that Intuipad. You are remotely controlling an experience running on a Windows PC in Player for Windows. So this is not Player. In Player, the experience is running on the iPad. With Intuipad, you have a window to what's running on the Windows PC. You are remotely controlling it. I would use that at maybe a conference where I hook up my laptop to a projector and then walk around the audience with my iPad or Android tablet and remotely control that experience on my laptop. Scheduling, that was one of the interface assets where you can schedule when actions occur. Pick a day, pick a time, pick a frequency. For those of you in the signage world, this is how you do day parting, right? So the schedule lives on the endpoint. It's not in some central hub. Remote actions. Experiences can talk to experiences. A trigger in experience A can cause things to happen in experience B, C, D, E, and F. They can talk to each other. But that includes interface assets. The event could be outside, like motion detection, where the action's in Intuiface, or the trigger could be in Intuiface, but the action is outside, like turning on the Philips Hue light bulb. So it's tons of stuff. All right, so what are your next steps? So make sure you all become familiar with the resources page on our website. This is where you'll find everything you'll ever need to get good at this product. This link will take you to the webinar page. All 3 recordings are there. The intro webinar, this recording is there, a webinar about the data tracking feature, and a webinar about using Excel and API Explorer. Very detailed, very comprehensive. I would encourage you to watch all of them. We have over 200 articles in an online library. You can click this button or just from Composer itself, see me in the upper right, 3D models, and it does a search. The very first article is 3D model asset, and here's everything you want to know about the 3D model asset. Okay. We update this data store daily. We are very proud of our online library. There is a user community, so you can communicate with other users, get their opinions, ask questions. The Experience Marketplace. If I go to the Experiences panel in Composer, both Player and, Composer has this Marketplace tab. It lists all of the free samples we've created for you. They're oriented around themes, so here's in-store, retail kiosk, museum exhibition, company sales pitch, restaurant menu, concierge kiosk, photo booth, build your own Sunday. I mean, all these different things using the basic building blocks of Intuiface. You can download these things for free, figure them out, reverse engineer them. You can steal from them, do whatever you want. It's a great way to learn how the product works and how to grow your skills. Anybody can use support. You don't have to be a paying customer. It's forum-based. You enter questions, you get answers, usually no more than a business day. Lots of other videos you could watch. There is a network of agencies around the world with Intuiface skills. You can outsource your project needs to them because you don't have the time or the interest, but you want somebody to use Intuiface. We offer our own services. We don't do full service. We want you to use Intuiface. So what we have are things like Bootstrap, which is a flat fee service of $5K, where we take your design needs, build a template, and teach you how to finish the job. It's a teach you to fish service. So you have to finish it, but you have all the skills to do it, which ultimately you should want, because the main reason to get Intuiface is so you can do the work. And this service will help you do that. And that's it. So there's other services where we can give training if you really want. We can do other things like help you build interface assets, but it's all documented online. You don't need us to build interface assets unless you just need the assistance. Here's all the information you need about interface assets, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the whirlwind comes to a close. So that's a lot of content to review. I understand there's a lot of product, but hopefully you understand it's not complicated, it's just a lot, and it's not hard. You just need to spend the time.